Hi everyone, Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor with Claremont Mental Health and the creator of the SNAP program, Survivors of Narcissistic and Abusive Personalities. I'm here today with Ryan Worthen. Hi Ryan.
Hey Mandy.
How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks for doing this video with me.
Always.
So, most of you already know me pretty well, but Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and what you're passionate about and what your role is at Claremont Mental Health.
Gotcha. Well, I'm currently an MSW student, and I specialize in trauma, specifically sexual trauma. With Claremont Mental Health, I am now assisting with the SNAP program and the SNAP curriculum, so I'll be running that with you. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things I'm passionate about, besides women's studies, is just ensuring that people who have suffered abuse and can receive the help and support that they need.
You just described me as well. Also passionate about women's studies, trauma, and helping people who have been abused and overcoming abuse. So I think we're a pretty good fit here. Yeah, I would say so. Now we do have our upcoming SNAP class. Starts on August 24th. It's a series of 4 classes, and Ryan and I will both be teaching that together this time around. So if you want to sign up for the next SNAP series, you're going to do that on our website, which is www.claremontmentalhealth.care, and you just click Schedule Now, and that's how you'll be able to sign up for classes, but also to schedule coaching sessions with Ryan. Today we're going to talk about how does trauma from the past affect our relationships today, and we're going to touch more specifically on the concept of 2 people or more than one person in the relationship also having trauma issues from the past that surface in the relationship. So maybe more than one person in the relationship has this issue. And I think it's also important to point out that these could be familial relationships or intimate partner relationships. It doesn't necessarily have to be an intimate partner relationship we're talking about. It can be any relationship.
Correct.
And here are the things that we're going to address. Where will we see the lingering effects of trauma crop up in relationships? And what types of things cause the trauma to surface? We're also going to answer the question, what should we do about this in the moment? And what can be done about it in the long term? And finally, what happens if we don't address it? So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'd like to point out that if you're in a relationship and these things are starting to sound familiar, perhaps you'd like to come back later and watch it again with someone else that might benefit from the information. But let's just get started. Ryan, we're going to talk now about where we see the lingering effects of trauma and how it crops up in the relationship. And one of the things that you and I talked about was that often we'll see this in communication and how we communicate with each other, how we either express our needs and our feelings or even not express our needs and our feelings. Can you talk more about that? How does trauma come up in communication within relationships?
Definitely. So many of us who have been through trauma often speak from a perspective of the trauma that we experience. So effectively, when we're in relationships, whether it's intimate partner or familial, if there's a situation where we have to communicate, we communicate from that perspective, and sometimes that can cause the message that we're trying to get through to get skewed or misconstrued or not fully understood, which can affect whether or not you get your needs met.
Right, so we're not expressing ourselves clearly, or the manner in which we're expressing ourselves isn't, it's not effective.
Right.
Yeah, okay, all right. And then let's say conflict. I'm sure trauma comes up during conflict, right? I mean...
Most definitely. That's one of the worst times that it does come up. When we try to communicate while there's conflict, we have a million different things going on, fight or flight. We're communicating from a position of heightened emotion, and combining that with trauma can cause even more issues and discord when it comes to communication.
And when we were discussing this, you said something that I really love, because I say this all the time, which is that trauma really never goes away. What do you mean by that?
We are always looking from perspective of the trauma that we experience. So how we interact with others, how we interact with ourselves, our thoughts, our behaviors, all of that is affected by the trauma that we've experienced.
And one way that I've heard that described, and how sometimes I explain that to clients, is that trauma leaves an imprint on your brain that you don't have control of. There's no way to outthink it, and there's no way to outwill it. It's not about willpower. It's not about changing your thinking. It's not about that you're weak or anything like that. It's an imprint that's left, and it will always be there. And that's not your fault, and literally there's not a whole lot you can do. Now, I mean, if we're going to get specific and technical about it, there is something that you could do, which would be exposure therapy. But like I say all the time, I'm never going to help someone be okay with behaviors or triggers that are reminiscent or, indicative of abuse. I'm not going to say, yeah, let me yell at you every session and call you names so that you don't have a reaction to that behavior. I'm never going to do that. So, technically, could we become more comfortable with it? Yeah. I mean, we really could if we wanted to, but no, let's not do that. That's probably not a great idea. So in other words, it's something that you don't have control over, and that it's a constant companion, especially in moments of conflict in relationships. Because many of us endured the trauma during conflict in a relationship.
Right.
And then something else you and I talked about was situational occurrences. And the way that we describe that, which is kind of confusing, and I'm hoping that you can simplify it for everyone, is that what winds up happening is that we internalize the external circumstance. In other words, we're in this situation and we start to add a lot of meaning to what's happening that may not be accurate. And then we're also simultaneously projecting, like you just said, we're always operating from a place of, where the trauma came from. So we wind up projecting our internal experience then onto the situation. Can you talk more about that?
Definitely. So when we get in states of conflict, when we get in states of being triggered, for example, there may be a situation with your intimate partner or another person that you're interacting with, and it may trigger a situation that happened a long time ago. But in that moment, you may treat that situation like how the traumatic experience was, even though it's not necessarily another traumatic experience. It's a trigger, it's a reminder. And as a result, that can cause us to act in that situation in a way that isn't necessarily conducive to getting your needs met. And it may cause you to project your own feelings onto the other person. And the other person just sitting there like, plot twist? I didn't know this was a thing.
Right, yes.
And then from there, you're continuously going from the perspective of being triggered. And that's, well, it's hard to control our triggers, and our triggers are by no means our fault. It does affect our interpersonal relationships and our behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great description. It's like, one thing that somebody had mentioned in terms of the situational stuff would be like someone stomping, like someone who is irritated and upset, and maybe for a good reason even. Maybe even the person who feels triggered, not the person stomping, but the other person even agrees with why they're stomping. But the behavior itself will make the body have a physiological response to the sound of someone stomping or to the, to the scene itself. Another one is slamming doors.
Right.
That people really do not handle that well. Knocking on windows, if you had somebody who was trying to get into your house, knocking on the window, or cops showing up. Even if the police have to be there for a reason that is not, it's not related to anything from your past, just, seeing a police officer on your front porch could take you to your knees, depending on what your history is. Okay, right. Good. Excellent. Well, the next question is, what can we do about this in the moment? What should we do in the moment when we notice this is happening, right? And I think that's what we said. The first step is to notice. And right. What are we looking for? We're looking for that adrenaline rush, the fight, flight, or anger. You're really angry, or you're really afraid, and it's not maybe congruent to right. the circumstance, and you're kind of, I don't want to say overreacting, but I guess that's the plain way to say it, is that what you're feeling doesn't match the circumstance. What comes right. after that? What do we do after that? Noticing.
After we notice, because self-awareness and mindfulness are extremely important in this situation, because if you know what's going on, then you can try to rectify it. You can't rectify it if you don't know what's actually happening. But once we get to that point, taking a step back and looking at it from an attempt at an objective perspective and a not so zoomed up perspective, so less so a first person perspective and more of a, okay, let me just look at the pure data of the situation and then evaluate and then address the situation from there.
Okay, so we're noticing, and then we're stepping outside of ourselves for a more objective view, and then trying to look at the facts.
Right.
What do we know, factually speaking? And avoiding the mind reading and assuming what the other person means by their actions right. or words, that we need to clarify and make sure that we understand what's going on with the other person. Something we mentioned before, which is really hard to do at first, but I think later on when you get better at navigating this, and let's say the other person is better at navigating it, because I think this particular thing takes two people, and that is that to be able to step away from the moment, to step out of it and let it, put it down, walk away, and then come back to the issue later. But I'm sure you see this too, Ryan, where some people wind up in a pursue-retreat pattern. So the person who's like, okay, I'm triggered, I can't talk about this right now. The other person is triggered, because remember, both people have, things that are happening. And so that other person might be triggered and going, oh no, we're talking about this right now. And I'm not going to sit here with this feeling anymore. You're going to help me feel better is basically what's happening. I don't like this feeling and I want it handled now. And then that doesn't tend to work out. But eventually, right. Once we really understand what's happening, if it's possible to step away, that's always a good thing to do too. Because when we're in that fight-flight mode, our brain isn't exactly online the way it should be.
Right. And I see that a lot with situations with a person who has a more avoidant personality compared to someone who may have abandonment issues.
Yes, exactly. Right, the abandonment thing. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Those factors are explosive at times. I mean, really start to push each other's buttons in all kinds of really deep and layered ways. And a lot of it is completely unspoken and no one even knows it's happening. It's just happening.
Exactly.
Okay, so, but what can we do about it in the long term? And, obvious things are coaching and therapy. Tell me about coaching and how coaching can help someone with this particular issue.
If we can identify the problem, we can game plan as to how we can address it. So we can see what interventions we have available for each respective person, because no two people are alike. The tool isn't necessarily going to work the same way for every single person, so I definitely won't say, hey, we're always going to do it this way. Some people need a bit more of a hands-on approach, other people a bit more hands-off. Mm-hmm. But we always find a way to implement interventions in order to get the coaching to get through your head like we need to.
Okay.
To get the behavior change like we need to.
Yeah, right. So even thinking outside of the box, and doing whatever approach is going to work for that particular circumstance.
Exactly.
And then with therapy, I would say that the difference would be is that coaching takes care of problem solving right now. You know, and of course you're working on long-term goals as well, but right. Therapy is more of a long-term relationship that we're going back into your childhood and talking about the incidents themselves, that this is where this originated. And
right. How did we get here?
Yeah, how do we get here? Exactly. So therapy is a little bit different in terms of coaching versus therapy. And for me, the way I like to work through problems is I kind of want to work through them and handle them right now. You know, so I think that the coaching sounds pretty attractive to me if I'm somebody who's in a lot of pain and wants to feel better a little faster.
Right.
And then, generally what we want to do for the long term is really gain understanding of ourselves and where this is happening, why it's happening, and then also to gain an understanding of the other person.
Right.
And what their history is and what their triggers are. And if we can accomplish that to some degree, that's probably going to lessen the impact of these incidents. Would you agree?
Definitely. And it all goes back to communication. Both parties, or all parties involved, have to communicate, especially out of the trauma response. Don't communicate out of the trauma response, but have to communicate what's going on so everyone can be on the same page.
Right. And if you're triggered while also trying to do that, sometimes that's not going to work out so well.
Right.
So in terms of the communication piece, what we're talking about is a structured type of communication within a setting that is purposefully, the intent and the purpose is for this type of communication. Not everybody's mad at each other, and so we're going to talk about it right here and now and hash it out. We're talking it is a more purposeful, deliberate, formal way of discussing the issue, right?
Right.
Okay, good. So then that way if someone is watching this and they think, I'm going to go talk to him right now about it. It's like, no, let's hang out. Let's wait a second. Hold on.
Call us first.
Yeah, call us first. And then lastly, and then we'll wrap it up after this last question, is what happens if we don't address it? Let's say that this is happening, and I just thought of another thing actually while I'm saying this, that you're going to love. And, so this is happening and we don't address it. What's going to happen to that relationship? What kind of things are going to be going on?
A lot of times, things like resentment can build, and when unspoken resentment or even spoken resentment starts to build, that causes, or at least can cause, a lot of discord within the relationship. And it's a powder keg. It just builds and builds until it eventually spills over. It's ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And we don't want to experience that. It's not fun.
No. That's a perfect description, powder keg. Yeah, it's just waiting for something to get it to, and sometimes it's something very small. It doesn't even have to be anything big. So we got resentment building up, and then we wind up kind of being engaged in this like self-fulfilling toxic dynamic, because now we're triggered, we're operating from a place of trauma. My behaviors are triggering the other person's behaviors are triggering me. So now we're triggering each other. And then the ways that
nothing productive is getting done.
Nothing productive is getting done. And that's, I would say, 99% of fights and conflict that go on is just this, and nothing's actually, and you know what I'm talking about when somebody's describing the fight they had, and I'm going, yeah, meaningless. This means nothing. You accomplish zero.
Right.
But something else I think that happens is a lot of mischaracterization, because we're treating the other person like they're someone that they're not, which causes them to treat us like we're someone that we're not. And we're making a lot of assumptions about what's going on in the other person's head.
Right. Which is a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
We're not mind readers.
Exactly, we're not. And that's the communication part that you've said, and poked on a few times, is that you've got to clearly really understand what the person is thinking. And often people they're not in touch with their feelings. They're not in touch with being able to verbalize. I mean, you and I can sit here and like ultra verbalize things to death. Somebody else is just like, I feel mad, and that's as far as it gets, until we start to really, understand more verbiage and language, and the nuances of it all.
Right.
And then here, generational patterns, that's the thing that I wrote down, right? Like, yes,
Right.
If this isn't addressed, we keep abusing each other, generationally speaking, over and over and over again. And somebody has to break the pattern, and that's what we're talking about, is breaking the pattern, breaking the cycle. And then finally, what if only one person is willing to address it? What life's gonna be like for that person? What could happen to that relationship? Would it be sustainable? What do you think? If one person's working on it and the other person is kind of not real interested in working on it.
Can definitely be difficult, and it can leave the person who's pursuing the assistance kind of feeling left hanging, left out, resentful, like they're putting in all the work and the other person's not putting in any work. The other person may not be clued in as to what's going on, so even more discord, even more miscommunication. No one knows what the other's doing, and ultimately it's the hope that it would get better,
Yes.
but there are a lot of factors that are increasing the odds of not getting better.
Right. Yeah. So, and one thing that could be positive about only one person working the problem is that they would be better armed to navigate the circumstance and to navigate the other person's triggers and their behaviors. So you might be able to be less impacted by things because you understand it more, but it's not solving the problem.
Right.
And I think, and you might feel this way too sometimes, is that we wind up with a tolerance for toxic and abusive behaviors. And when one person is learning about it and realizing that there's another way, a healthier, better way, it actually reduces the tolerance for the behavior. Now, where we would put up with it all the time and not even really notice it, now when it happens, it'll cut you in half because you're
Right.
more attuned and aware, and so then it becomes, I don't know, less tolerable.
Right.
So that I see that a lot, where one person's coming, the other person isn't, and then after a while they just can't handle the behaviors of the other person anymore.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because getting out of a toxic relationship is healthier than having a tolerance for toxicity.
Exactly, right. We don't really want to stay in a toxic situation,
Right.
if we can help it. First, we want
Right.
to fix it, of course, but sometimes you can't, and that's just a hard truth.
Right.
That a lot of people don't want to accept, is that sometimes there's no fixing it.
Right.
You're going to either live with it how it is, or you're going to have to get away with it,
Right.
or get away from it, rather. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we did it. We hit all the points we wanted to hit, and I think there's a lot of good information there for everyone. Be sure to sign up for the upcoming SNAP series, August 24th. Go to our website, hit schedule now, and that will take you to the scheduling app where you can sign up for the classes. Ryan is at email Ryan@ClaremontMentalHealth.care. That's his email address, is Ryan@ClaremontMentalHealth.care. If you want to reach out directly to him and see about some coaching. Ryan, isn't it true that you offer like a 10-minute consultation for people just to see if you're a good fit for them?
Yep. I know how difficult it is trying to find someone who matches you well. I'll give you the first half hour for free.
Okay.
Just
right.
Just so we can sit and talk.
Yeah.
See if we can match, see if we can connect.
Okay. That's very, very generous of you. Very kind. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and end our video then, and I hope it's been helpful. See you next time.